Hello and welcome to you all watching and listening to me on the internet and on Facebook through Elevated Vision. As you know, my name is Mr. Elevated T, and I live and work in Willesden in London in England. Thank you all very much for the interesting questions you have sent in to me. It was hard to choose a question to answer this week, but I have chosen a particular one to answer from the big badge that I received from all over the world. This week's question comes from Mrs. O'Murphy in Galway in Ireland. Mrs. O'Murphy asks, what is spiritual poverty? Mrs. O'Murphy, that is a very interesting question. Well, what is spiritual poverty? A good way to understand spiritual poverty is to think of spiritual poverty as experiencing our state of incompleteness with spirit. This can be due to weaknesses, unfulfilled needs, emotional injuries and hurts at the hands of others. Also our own immaturities and failures. Spiritual poverty has to do with those parts of ourselves that are not what they should be. Perhaps things we cannot repair in our own strength. When people experience at a deep level their neediness, incompleteness and dependency, the way they actually are, they are often overwhelmed. Spiritual poverty is really the cure for things like narcissism, self-righteousness, and a host of other problems. When our eyes are open to our brokenness, we do not feel better about ourselves. Rather, we feel that something is terribly wrong and we need help and healing. Broken-heartedness is related to spiritual poverty. It is the state of being wounded or crushed by some loss, person, hurt, injustice, or circumstance. When a person is downcast because of an emotional issue, a problem with relationships or a career injury, he or she can be broken-hearted. Broken-heartedness often brings about a sense of our spiritual poverty as it shows us our need. Now, it has to be said, I am not saying that everyone with life problems is poor in spirit. Some are in denial. Others blame their problems on other people. Still others believe that, given enough time, they can solve their problems all by themselves. These people have not yet come to the end of themselves, to the humble acceptance of reality that causes them to grieve, as a signal that they understand their position. Really what I'm saying, however, is that those with life problems have more opportunities to recognize their need for healing, because the evidence is right there in front of them. Spiritual poverty helps us grow if we know what it is. And because the experience of poverty is both practical and spiritual, being aware of our incompleteness moves us toward our spiritual mind and higher self. It draws us to the spiritual part of ourselves, which is love, truth, support and all we need to grow and heal. Therefore, spiritual poverty can be a rich part of the growth process when we understand it and then move beyond it. The way to move forward with all of this then is to connect with our higher self. When we talk about our higher self, it tends to conjure up all kinds of images of some kind of angelic, mystical being located in some faraway place. Though there is a small amount of truth to that image, the higher self is a lot more physical and, most importantly, local than most people tend to imagine. It is true that there is an aspect of us that does exist beyond our physicality. This is the unseen part that helps to get us to where we need to be, the part that is a manifestation or a God. God is all that is. Universal mind. Higher self. So our higher self acts as a guide, counselor, best friend, parent, and many other aspects depending on what we need at any given moment. What most people do not realize is that there is also a very physical component to this higher part of us. Our physical self, which includes our life situation, our relationships, and so on. It is the outward reflection of what is going on at a higher level that is filtered through our egos. What I mean by that is, our higher self will communicate with us in various ways. Through intuition, hunches, sudden unexpected life changes and more. We may or may not choose to listen or act on those communications. But in truth, it is our physical self that is the receiver of these messages. Just like a fax machine or a telephone. If one chooses to receive and follow that guidance, the potential is that one would become the physical manifestation of his or her own divine self. If not, then the opposite is true to the varying degree. at which one chooses to accept and follow the divine guidance brought through from the higher self. And because our divine, or higher self, is an infinite being, our own potential is also infinite. Every single one of us has a blueprint, a kind of divine template that holds a tremendous amount of information. This blueprint exists in every single atom of our beings, physical and on an energy level. The amount of information that this blueprint carries is phenomenal, covering every aspect of who we are, what we are doing here, every lifetime we have ever experienced, as well as all potentialities of what we are meant to become. The main function of our higher self is to help us gain access to the information that resides within this blueprint. In truth, our higher self is that blueprint personified. Any answer to any question we could ever have could be answered by our higher self. Every problem can be solved and every obstacle can be overcome. Our higher or divine self is our inner voice, spirit guide, best friend, mother, father, tour guide, entertainment director, and so much more, all rolled into one very magnificent angel. Our higher self is not only part of us, it is ourselves at the core of our being. We only need to become aware of it and ask for assistance. Our higher self is waiting for us to call upon it and will never leave us. No more spiritual poverty anymore. We can all learn to have a very real and physical communication with our higher selves. The process is not as difficult as one would think. It just takes a little bit of practice and patience. I would suggest that you consider the subject of metaphysical science and working with a qualified and registered metaphysician to learn more. And I do not mean seeing a fluffy bunny unprofessional type of person either. Okay, I will be here to talk to you next week when I will choose another question to address from all those of you who send them in to me from Elevated Facebook. Thank you, Mrs. O'Murphy, for this week's question, and I do hope you have found my reply interesting and enlightening. And I hope the Elevated Vision viewers feel the same. So, it is goodbye from London. And goodbye from me, Mr. Elevated T, for this week. Goodbye, everybody.